Yeah, films. We watched some films. So let's talk about those films.
All right, let me jump in. So, Get Out is from 2017, which feels like a million years ago.
Yeah, it was very long ago. It feels so old from now.
It really does. It was pretty long ago. So it is about a young African American visits his white girlfriend's parents for the weekend, where his simmering uneasiness about the reception of him eventually reaches a boiling point and is directed by Jordan Peele. What a subtle way to explain this film. It reaches a boiling point for sure.
Yeah.
So let me tell you what happens. There will be spoilers in this episode as per the usual. This is a film where pretty much everybody knows the spoiler. Same thing with us. Like, that's not really where I would say watching Get Out the first time, and the reveal was intense. So
Yeah.
if you've somehow avoided knowing what happens and you've never watched it, please go watch it as a first time and then come back to us. If you have watched it, you know the deal. So let's talk about what happens in Get Out. So Get Out is a film that effectively blends horror, comedy, and social commentary and into a genuinely brilliant horror film. Following Chris, a young Black photographer who is going to meet his white girlfriend's parents for the first time. And inspired by Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, a film in which a Black man meets the parents of his white girlfriend. It's almost like Peele mentions that's part of the inspiration. It's very much like, what if that was scarier? What if all the like subtle fears were loud? you know, he loves saying the quiet part out loud. That's, I'm pretty sure what his podcast is called, Quiet Part Out Loud, and then Out There Screaming is their anthology film book, which I have.
Nice.
The couple in Guess Who's Coming to Dinner are wealthy liberals, and throughout the film, they must address the latent racism their relationship brings to light when interacting with her parents, who vehemently oppose the relationship. So it's very similar where these are people of status. They've lived in this, like, you know, expectation that it's okay. And then they encounter her parents who are like, absolutely not. And they're like, whoa, really? This time, this day and age, which was a long time ago. So for us to be like, this day and age. And in a skillful blend of dramedy and absurd, Peele takes this plot and adds a second storyline reminiscent of Stepford Wives and Invasion of the Body Snatchers. So that's where we get the horror kind of section of that. So Chris's girlfriend, Rose, seems unaware of the stress Chris is experiencing at this impending meeting, not entirely understanding his caution. And on the other end of the spectrum is Chris's best friend, Rob, who serves as like comic relief throughout the film. And he's a comical TSA agent who is immediately against the meeting altogether. And he warns Chris that Rose's family and people like them, example, rich white people, be making people into weird sex slaves and shit. He just flat out was like, listen, that's what they be doing out there. And of course, like, we can laugh that off because it's an absurd scenario. And it's that parallel right in the beginning of like her being like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't say my Black boyfriend is coming to dinner. And he's like, but why didn't you? Like, she doesn't, like, she appears to not understand why that even needs to come up because, you know, she's colorblind. She just sees Chris. Right? She doesn't see color. And that's the problem.
That's sure she does.
She absolutely does see color. She absolutely, yeah. But as far as we know at that time, she just sees Chris for Chris. She loves him. It's her first Black boyfriend. The film unfolds with a fluid blend of comedy and discomfort. Though Rose's family aren't loud racists, their prejudices and innate racism speaks volumes. When Rose's father, Dean, tries to paint himself an ally, a white liberal, and asks, how long has this whole thing been going on? This thing. Chris smiles it away. He says a number of terrible things, including the fun, like, I would have voted for Obama a third time if I could, which she makes a joke of in the beginning. And then he does say it. And you laugh at it because you're like, ha ha, people be like that. And later during an annual party featuring a plethora of uppity rich white people. What unfolds is a tense, uncomfortable, and at times truly terrifying series of events, including like a moment where Chris goes upstairs and everyone stops talking.
Yeah.
And then they look up and they're like, you're like, what the F? What? So starting slowly with odd comments on Chris's body, his history, and his blackness, Chris flexes those fine-tuned code-switching muscles with every outrageous question, touch, or assumption, and to every microaggression, Chris meets it with a smile and a laugh. He's incredibly uncomfortable, and we've talked about Get Out and Us in our 2-part Jordan Peele episode, and we talk about how there was that need for Chris to laugh off and the fact that he ended up in this dangerous situation because despite like those red flags and all the alarm bells going off, he couldn't do anything about it. Like those are always going off. There's always red flags and you have to just like shrug them off or play it cool, even if it's detrimental to your own health. And it's kind of like the way that he interacts with the cop in the beginning, how he's just like compliant. He's like, here, I'll give you my ID. And she's the one who's outraged. That's how he operates with everyone is a cop that we need to be like de-escalating for because they're not going to do it. So as absurd as the interactions are and as infuriating as Chris's reluctance to do anything about it, Peele's horror seeps into every interaction, leaving our hair on end. Though we don't know what, we know something is up. Again, they all stop talking and they say absurd things and you're also laughing uncomfortably. You're like,
oh God.
Like if that happened in real life, oh my God. Eventually, the canary in the coal mine, Rob, finally gets through to Chris. After Chris ran into another black man at the party who was acting quite peculiar, that's the best way to explain it, he attempts to get a photo of him. And the flash causes the man to have a frightening reaction where he urges Chris to get out. Rob quickly responds to the picture, saying that the man has been missing for some time and his name is actually Andre, not Logan. He's definitely not in a relationship with this old white lady. I told you they've been making them into weird sex slaves and shit. Get out of the house. So Chris urges Rose to leave, who complies before turning on him in one of the best film reveals ever. It's one of my favorite moments in the film because it's like chaos and he's like, he doesn't trust her. He found a bunch of pictures. Clearly, she's not.
Yeah, he found the box. He does not trust her.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like, I built this whole relationship up.
Well, you don't want to believe that.
Yeah, you want it to think that it's okay.
You would not assume. There's no world. Like the worst case scenario that you could come up with is not the ending of Get Out. Yeah. Like there's no part of him, like he knows something is bad, he knows this is not safe and he's alone, but it's still like there's still a chance I could get out. I like she's not evil.
Yeah, they don't think that exactly.
Yeah, like he knows something's
They don't
up.
think there's a basement with experiments.
Yeah, there's not. This isn't Separate Lives, and that's kind of the brilliance of it too, right? And I think his genuine he knows something's up. He knows, first of all, he's not her first black boyfriend. Second of all, he saw 2 pictures of people who have been walking around the house, so that's something wrong. So he knows something has occurred to those people and to Andre, right? He just doesn't know. He just knows he's in danger. And when she is panicking, I'm looking. And he's like, Rose, where are those keys? That stop. Because at first he's he shouts at her. And then there's a moment of that defeat. And then when she pulls it out, I can't give you those, Chris. I was like, no! You're kidding. So honestly, one of the best film reveals in the world. That's why I was saying, Don't Worry, Darling did not have that. I knew that Jack wasn't shit. Okay, so when he turned, I was just like, what is this pathetic worm, man? I don't care. I knew he was, he's an idiot. He's not conspiring it. It just didn't have the flair. It didn't have the fire and nothing could. So turns out Rob was right. And in a way, the Armitages are turning people into sex slaves. They're trying to get that lady, that creepy lady, a black husband. That's what Andre was being for that lady. So through absurd science, they have discovered a way to transfer the consciousness of their people, the Order of the Coagula, It's fun. Into the bodies they deem superior, which just so happens to be Black bodies. Right? There's a conversation in the beginning where Dean Armitage mentions that his dad was a runner and was beat out at the Olympics, and he has like this whole moment. He's like, yeah, Hitler's up there, like with his like Aryan race bullshit. And then he gets beat out by a Black man, and it's like this whole thing, but without like explaining that like he took the wrong thing away from that. Right? It wasn't like an understanding of the power and like appreciation of like different races. Instead it was like, oh, okay, we should have that one then. We just need their body and then we'll be cool. So having held a silent auction earlier in the day, Chris has been promised to a member of the Coagula. He is sent to a subconscious hellscape called the Sunken Place, which is accessed via hypnotism by Rose's mother, Missy, who is a psycho therapist. Though Chris avoids the Sunken Place and in a riveting third act fights his way through white people in white and Black bodies to escape. In the final moments of the film, Chris kneels above Rose as she lays dying, shot in the gut by him, and he is tired, mentally exhausted, and hopeless when a wash of red and blue lights pour over him. And audiences everywhere, like your stomach drops. Because you're like, you assume he's done for, with the police here to take him away. But then you breathe a sigh of relief because it's actually Rob here to save him, thank God, in his little TSA vehicle. And now that you know what happens, let's dive into the film and why I think it's one of the best films made in the history of filmmaking, and not just horror, but just like as a film. That's why it's in all those studies. So Stepford Wives is to feminism what Get Out is to racism. So, as I mentioned earlier, Peele was greatly inspired by Stepford Wives, the original film and the book by Ira Levins, and also like a little Rosemary's Baby, also by Ira Levins, Invasion of Body Snatchers, all them. He also has like a lot of motifs and references. He does this all the time to The Shining and other horror greats because he's just in great appreciation of horror as a genre. So both films, Stepford Wives and Get Out, feature a photographer, talented and independent, who is betrayed by their partner. For Joanna and Stepford, this betrayal comes from her husband wanting to turn her into a perfect housewife and a robot sex slave. For Chris, Rose doesn't even want his body. It's for somebody else. So Rose, like the husbands in Stepford Wives and Rosemary's Baby, is manipulative and seems like an ally until the very end. Like both films do that thing where it's like they're not great, but they might also be a victim, right? By their ignorance. And thanks to The Take, which is a really great resource for like analyzing film, they highlighted some of the similarities between Stepford Wives and Get Out, because it's been a long time since we watched Stepford Wives. It's like 2020. I don't even know. So they say Rose's true allegiance is to her class and the privilege she's happy to enjoy. So not to Chris at all. The Take also remarks on the sinister absurdity of the technology and plot for both Peele and Levin. So in the film, the horror is revealed as something absurd, outrageous, and exaggerated to exert control over the protagonists, women in Stepford Wives and Black people in Get Out. However, in society, the control doesn't come from science fiction surgery, but instead subtle control that holds power over others, like laws or restrictions or social understanding, right? All those subtle things that are just ingrained in the way we operate. Or, I don't know, our prison system. While Stepford Wives speaks to feminist issues and absurdifies the threat of the patriarchy in Stepford, Connecticut, Peele uses Get Out to sound the alarm on the racism in our country as a whole. The treatment of Chris throughout the film isn't new. It isn't unexpected, but the gross science experiment is an exaggerated representation of the harms of white liberals in our country. So that's the connection. All right, so let's talk about showcasing Black history and trauma without being traumatic.
Peele skillfully weaves Black horror, fears, and history into the film. With each watch, I notice new things in the set design, the music, the wardrobe, everything. Here are some things to consider that I'm sure you've caught yourself or heard somewhere. So firstly, obviously, is the silent auction. In the middle of the film, the Order of the Coagula, which is this group of white people now putting their minds and consciousness into black
bodies, holds a silent auction disguised as a silent game of bingo. This is reminiscent, obviously, of slave auctions of America's past,
as Chris's black body is literally being sold off by somebody else who claims to own him.
Right? The Armitages are like, this is ours, we caught it, and now you buy it for whatever reasons. There's a cotton in the chair, so the way that Chris escapes the operation and avoids the sunken place is that he stuffs his ears with cotton from the chair that he's tied to. The leather has been ripped away because Chris has this like relentless scratching that he does when he's in a traumatic experience. It's like a coping mechanism that we see him do earlier in the film when he's first put into the sunken place. So this could be a reference to picking cotton, a common practice for enslaved people, only now the cotton is saving Chris's life. And it also made me think of Odysseus and his fight against the sirens in Greek mythology and using that idea of like closing our ears to avoid the siren's call. I was like, that's great. Yeah. I love a good, Odyssey reference. There's the fact that the Armitage's house is a plantation-style home equipped with their own black servants. And though these black servants are inhabited by the elder Armitages, the bodies they are using are black, right? So the black bodies are commodities and part of the property. The original people are not there. They're just objects for these crusty white people. Code switching. So Chris puts up with so much more than we think he should because most of this is normal, unfortunately, like some of the awful things that they say.
Chris is not naive or easily manipulated. He's just used to silencing the alarms.
Right? When the white people arrive, they all arrive in black cars in a row, like a funeral procession, and they're dressed like a funeral too. So that was just like a little, like they're ready. There's a lot of culty things, obviously, because it is a cult. The deer, so the deer motif comes up a lot in the film. So first we see a deer hit when Chris, which represents Chris, obviously, in danger and as prey. They hit them at the beginning, and that's when we first meet the cop. We also learn later that Chris's mom died after hitting a deer in the resulting accident. So that's just a incredibly touching moment for him. Like it's a traumatic experience to relive. Dean Armitage, the dad, remarks that all deer should be killed. They are taken over and should be put down. He's like, it's gotten out of control. They're useless. Which is this unsubtle commentary on how he feels about black people. It's so obvious. It's gross. Chris encounters a deer in the sunken place made of bone, serving as a warning. And then lastly, Chris uses the stag head, which was originally mounted as a trophy, right? Again, representing Chris and the Armitage's intentions, but it is now a weapon. So there's a lot of like, we're repurposing things that have been used to harm us or historically harmed us. And then he impales him. There's the teacup. I found this great study guide on medianight.org. I'll get out media. I'll link it in the blog. But they had a few little references and things that I was like, I don't really think about that. So like the teacup. So the way that Missy hypnotizes people is that she like does this like circling with her teacup and it's like, shoo, shoo, and then she'll like click it. She'll like think, think. I read somewhere that it was like, that's what like slave owners would do. Like, if they had like slaves in the home, it'd be like a think, think, and they'd know to come and serve them. But I don't know if that's true. But in this thing, they mentioned that the teacup and spoon that Missy uses as a hypnosis tool has a dual meaning. It is often seen as a symbol of civility and politeness, but the tea industry was founded on violent colonialism in Southeast Asia and everywhere. Right? Like we have the Boston Tea Party right here. But this, attempt to control tea has caused lots of pain. So it's kind of like this duality of like, it's we're upper class, we're important. And then also, but we murdered a bunch of people to get this tea in the first place.
Yep.
The act of separating her milk from the colored Fruit Loops like a fucking freak is clearly segregation. This is something that Rose does at the end after she's like given up the facade of being his girlfriend. She wears like all white, and she's like, she's definitely like the femme fatale, like the Bunny Boiler type personality all of a sudden. And she like sometimes she's like scrolling for new, like she's looking at like basketball players. She's like, who is my new target? It's so weird. But yeah, it's besides the fact that it is weird, like it's absurd. If I saw someone eating cereal separately, I'd be like, I can never interact with this person ever again. That person's a psychopath. But it's very obviously like it was colored Fruit Loops and her white milk.
Yep.
Can't even touch. Rose and Chris are often wearing red, white, and blue, which I didn't really notice.
Me neither, yeah.
She also wears blue. In the beginning, she's wearing a jean dress. But Chris never wears red because red is associated with the cults, or just cults in general. So that same helpful study guide mentions that all of the Armitages and their guests wear red, which is a symbol of their secret society. And it's all like a pocket square might be red, or a red scarf or something, right? So red, of course, is associated with blood, and they don't mind spilling lots of it to get what they want. Chris, however, wears no red whatsoever, and this is one of the things that marks him as an outsider. The scene at the family gathering, we see the motif of the color red being a representative of the hidden society. Everyone at the party is wearing something red while Chris is wearing blue. This represents his status as an outsider and the us versus them mentality. And also there's like the fact that Rose and Chris are wearing red, white, and blue. It's just like the American flag. Like I'll show the picture, but there's like one of him in his jean shirt, and then she's wearing a red and white striped shirt. Yeah. And I was just like, yeah, whatever, they got clothes. But it was intentional from the costume designer. So the sunken place, right, acts to push him down and silence him. It's essentially this black void where he watches the world from a tiny screen, like, which is his eyes, right? But he is no longer in control. He's now a passenger in his own body. So the intent is to remove his autonomy and vision. And it's also the audience, right? The sunken place is both a theater surrounded in darkness and watched through a tiny screen separated from the content, and also represents the detached Black experience. So thinking of like, the fact that Chris puts up with so much is because he can't always be there, be present, and react in the way that other people can, right? Peele wants us to leave the sunken place, us being the audience. He wants us to wake up and get out, wake up to the truth, and to learn from Chris's mistakes, no longer laughing off the subtle cruelties and aware of the real threats. So it looks like a theater for a reason. It's supposed to be like, this is you guys, wake up, right? Chris's camera photography and the commodification of his experiences is also a thing that comes through throughout the film. So Chris is a photographer, and it's reminiscent of the protagonist in Stepford Wives, and he is very talented, and his work is an expression of himself and his community. It's the first thing we see in the film is his work. Right? And he uses his camera as a way to keep himself safe and detached from the subtle horrors around him. When he views the white people through the lens, their words become more preposterous and mean. And he kind of uses it like to separate himself. Like he can look through this lens and he's not like fully present. And his flash also frees two of the Black men from the sunken place. Like the fact that he does it for Andre and then Grandpa. I don't know what Grandpa's real name was. But yeah, that like there's a strength in that. Also, the person who buys him at the auction doesn't even care that he's Black. It's not really about that. For him, he wants his eyes. He wants those things that you see through. But that like Chris's eyes and his view, right? The way that he sees the world is his strength, right? Is his independence, it's his power. And so taking that is Super cruel. Redbone by Childish Gambino. This is the first song we hear in the film. It starts with singer and actor Childish Gambino, Donald Glover, who urges the listeners to stay woke, which is a phrase which has become associated with the Black Lives Matter movement and indicates a consciousness of racial prejudice and discrimination in America. But it's also an urging for Chris to stay aware of the dangers around him, as it also warns him that they're going to find you and going to catch you sleeping. It's such a great, Peele's just great at that anyway, of including music and kind of being not so subtle about them. There's also, the last thing I'll say about some of the film things, this is actually more of a language thing, which I'm about to get into, but Rob references Jeffrey Dahmer, and it's not an accident that that's the serial killer he chose to reference, because he's just it might be like Jeffrey Dahmer or something. He says it kind of as a joke, but it's also real. But even though he's saying it in jest, Jeffrey Dahmer is specifically a serial killer who sought out Black and brown boys for his own sick reasons. He had very specific reasons for seeking them out. There are a lot of disenfranchised, vulnerable people, so they didn't get any help. And he was most harmful to Black communities and is known for eating and experimenting on his victims. So that is an intentional choice of serial killers. Because he could have said Ted Bundy. But he did. He specifically said that they're both pieces of crap. But language is also super important in the film, serving as both foreshadowing and confessions of a character's true intentions, such as Dean's rant on the deer population. But some other things I caught in my many rewatches were Dean says something in the beginning, he's given the tour, and he's like, it feels like there's a piece of grandmother in the kitchen, and then they walk in a little and Georgina's right there. Which is spoilers, that's grandma. So I feel like it was a piece of grandma still here. I cackled. But that's something you wouldn't catch if you weren't you didn't know.
Yeah, you didn't know.
You were just it's scary. Because it is a jump scare moment, because she's just standing there hi, I'm here to help you. And you're like, oh. Rob also mentions the robot sex slaves, which is exactly what Stepford Wives are in the first one. That's what they're trying to do. It's really silly. The main title is called Tsitsilitsa Kwa Wahanga, and I'm totally probably butchering that. I apologize. I don't speak Swahili, but it means listen to the elders in Swahili, and the translation to the words throughout are brother, run, listen to the elders, listen to the truth, run away, save yourself. And in some of the study guides and things I was reading, it was obviously Swahili, because it would be a native language, but also because we the way that our ancestors communicate with us is usually in this disconnected way, right? We get the energy, we get the vibes of what they would be doing to us, but we can't always understand exactly what they're saying. So there would be still that barrier of translation. The wrong language used by Black people in the film, who are actually white people, is a great way to unsettle the viewers and keep them aware of something being off. Even the fact that Andre didn't know to pound it. The thing. I'm sorry, Logan. And just the eeriness of Grandpa talking to him, just she's one heck of a gal, isn't she? And you're like, what the F? And I think of the short story Where Are You Going, Where Have You Been by Joyce Carol Oates, which is one of my favorites, where a young girl encounters a strange man who uses outdated language and is later revealed to be the devil. But as she's talking to him, she's like, why are you saying that? That's old. No one says that anymore, old man. But he's performing human. So there's little subtleties that you're that's weird. He's standing weird. And so that whenever outdated language is used, I think of that and I'm like, what's up with that? And then also is people keep showing treating Chris like an other. The point when they kind of corner him and they're like, do you like being Black? Do you feel like being Black is cool? Or I forget what they say, but it's really loud and stupid. And he gestures to Logan to be like, can you contribute to this conversation? Because you're also a fellow Black man. And he's like, I love being Black. It's such a pleasant experience. But clearly Chris is why are they treating me differently than the other Black people here. And he even says, like, I was
Yeah.
feeling comfortable, like, you know, I felt more at ease because you were here because of the code switching thing. And then he realized that he can't uncode switch with these people.
Yeah.
That's the whole thing. And then the last thing I'll say, and I'm sure there's so many more, please tell me. Please comment and be like, he also says this thing and it means this, because I love that stuff. But the last thing I caught and it made me cackle was that tour. The tour says so much, but he says, "Oh, don't go into the basement." Dean says this to Chris because there's black mold in there, and it's because there's a mold for Black people. The science experiments. So it's again unsubtle AF. So here's a brief on the white liberal problem that Kat is going to go into way more detail in, but I did want to just like mention a few things because I was in that place in my brain. So, and because like that's the point of this film. So, firstly, Peele was strategic in choosing this family and the behaviors of them and their friends as the villains, right? So Peele has spoken in interviews about working to address the post-racial lie, that's what he called it, that we found ourselves living in during the Obama administration. He wanted to show that racism was still very much alive and well and just as harmful, if not more, when wielded quietly by the white elite liberals, right? So just as Kat has explained often in our show, almost constantly, right? It is dangerous to other or monstrosize people as it disconnects us from their actions and allows us to ignore responsibility, right? If we say they're a monster, we're humans. So we're in no way capable of doing such monstrous things. But then we're not privy to the fact that that is just a person too, and that people are capable of harm, right? Anybody is capable of harm. So by not choosing to have these villains be right-wing nut jobs, neo-Nazis or rednecks or just like the obvious villains, he removed the ability to monstrosize them in that way. To be like, well, those are just ignorant assholes, right? Those are just the, you know, sisters of the Confederacy or whatever, you know, like brush it off. And I know that I've met people like the Armitages before, right? Have you? Cat listeners, like you have, right? You've talked to someone like that.
Yeah, but honestly, if you're a white person, you also have relatives that do that.
Yeah.
And you have to call them out all the time. So
I dated someone and their whole family was kind of like that. Like I peeped, like they were this family. Like watching it the first time, I was like, I've been in this house. Like I've been in this house and I've had that like the laugh and like the discomfort and like I am light skinned, right? So it was like, imagine if I wasn't. Like if I was like my Florida color, it might be a little different as things are going on. So but yeah, absolutely I've met the Armitages before. Walking around. Saying things out of pocket. In that, again, referencing that great study guide I found, Peele said he wrote them as the kind of people I'd meet at parties who were eager to tell me they voted for Obama, but whose attitudes can be considered just as patronizing and as dehumanizing as those of more obvious racists. It's even more dangerous because they aren't like, they're pretending, right? They're hiding it. Right. So the Armitages and the Order of the Coagula would think they aren't racist, actually. They would imagine the world is post-racial. And the proof that shows that they're not racist is the fact that they chose Black bodies. Didn't they? Like they couldn't be racist if they think Black bodies are good enough for their experiments, right? However, this appreciation for Black bodies is specifically through the lens of controlling and using the bodies, right? There's no autonomy, there's no actual like humanity that's involved in that. So they would think that appreciating in any way the Black bodies the Black bodies that they're intending to use, that they couldn't be racist. And it reminds me of that like comment I made about how Olivia Wilde must have been like, well, wouldn't it be more racist if I didn't cast this woman as Margaret who dies and is ignored by all the white women? You know, like I feel like that's where her, like she'd be like, it'd be more racist if I was worried about that, right? Like, let's colorblind cast it. And it was like, whoa. Like we said this so many times. As soon as you cast a Black person in a film like that, you have to consider what that does. Because it does change the narrative completely. The same way, like, you know, George A. Romero did not intend to have a Black protagonist in Day of the Dead, but it changed the whole story when he gets gunned down by militia at the end.
Yeah.
Like,
well, yeah, it's a whole thing, but I'll get into my section. But it's just a lack of self-awareness that's like really essential into that, and like your motivation too, where it's like, why do you not want to be perceived as racist? Is it so people will like you, or because you actually care?
That's super real. I love it. Yeah.
And you have to shift that in order to do a lot of that deprogramming.
Yeah, because if you see it like, because the system is racist, right? Like we all have things that we have to unlearn, societal things that you just like grow up believing or understanding, even without you knowing that fully, right?
Yeah.
And so if you act like affronted, right? Like insulted,
immune.
right?
Yeah.
You're kind of taking responsibility for it too, like in that way. Like if you're like, I'm not right, it's like, yeah, you are. We all are.
Everyone is.
That's what race. That's what it is. It's a system.
For a lot of
it's not a person. It's a system of oppression. So we have to acknowledge that first, and then be like, okay, I'm trying to unlearn. Yeah. So exactly. Thanks, Scott. So the last thing I wanted to talk about was this idea of Black trauma versus Black horror, because I think Get Out is a brilliant social commentary film that effectively scares us without re-traumatizing us, right? So earlier in the season, while talking about culture shock, we discussed the appreciation we had for the delicate care taken with the content of the film, given the reality that reality around these issues are so horrifying, right? Peele was also incredibly caring in his execution of the message, and I've mentioned often in the show this idea of asking, who is this for when we're watching a horror film? That's Media Literacy 101, right? Intent. A part of that question of like, who is this for, is what is the intent of the film? Because knowing what the film wants to achieve can help us understand who it's for and how we should feel about it, quite honestly, right? And if the film's intention is to educate an unknowledgeable audience, like an ignorant audience, and reveal the horrors of a community, what a horrors a community is facing, then it most likely isn't for me and others like me, because we'd be living it. Like, I don't need that. Like, I don't need it in that way, right? And it runs the risk of re-traumatizing us and the folks who are in it, and most likely does not add anything new to the dialogue. It's just trying to catch people up. However, if the film is for us and by us, then we can have a film that offers us catharsis. And I watched this phenomenal video, highly, highly recommend for y'all. It's going to be linked here by Princess Weeks, titled Black Trauma versus Black Horror, where she essentially reads my minds. I was like, thank you. And she addresses the problems with films like Antebellum and Them, or media like Antebellum and Them, because Them is a show. But these are two pieces of media that the Ghouls have intentionally not covered. I threw out the option of Antebellum, and it was quickly like, no. We don't have to always cover the bad stuff. These films are sensational at best and unnecessary at worst, and putting Black harm and history on display for shock value, not catharsis and healing. She said something that really stuck with me. She said, catharsis in horror is for the victim, not the perpetrator. I was like, facts, damn. And that feeling is for us. And when a film is made with us in mind, it can be freeing, providing a release of tension and fear. But when it's in the wrong hands, like we as the audience are in the wrong hands and with the wrong intentions, the film can result in further harm. This week also mentions like she has a full discussion about the location, like the role of suburbs in horror and the history of subjugating that, like in the classic horror film People Under the Stairs, which one day we will cover. It's one of my favorites. Yeah. It's getting remade by Monkey Paw Productions, so it'll definitely come up. So also she has a whole commentary on mental health in horror and more, and I highly, highly recommend a watch. Give it some looks. Originally, Peele had an ending in which Rob does not come to Chris's rescue, right? And this is where the trauma, I think, would have come. Instead, in that first ending, which is the alternate ending, it's a white cop, which I believe is the cop from the beginning, who locks him up And it's a depressing ending and one that the audience was undoubtedly expecting. It's the same that thought we had when we saw the red and blue lights, the sinking feeling of like, great. And there's always like, absolutely, there's space for bad, like not happy endings. I'm like, I love those. When that happens sometimes, like when evil wins sometimes, I'm like, okay, yeah, because that'd be what reality is sometimes. But sometimes you got to give us a break, right? It's the catharsis.
Yeah.
Are you trying to hurt us or are you trying to give us catharsis, right? So
Yeah.
that was the original ending. And Peele later rewrote the ending, explaining that in the political and social state of the world, people needed a release and a hero. And this is what he had to say.
Now, I wrote this movie in the Obama era, and we were in this post-racial lie. This movie was meant to call out the fact that racism is still simmering underneath the surface. By the time I was shooting it, it was quite clear that the world had shifted. Racism was being dealt with. People were woke, and people needed a release and a hero, which is why I changed the ending and had Rod show up at the end.
Thank you, Peele. That is why I have an appreciation. That's why Chris is on my wall. I also have Nope back there. I don't have anything us related yet. So if you got some cool art, let me know. But there's just it's just an amazing film. And I hope Peele doesn't make me feel so bitter for liking him soon.